"You fit the description." That's what he said. No hello, no reason, just that, like it explained everything. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't moved wrong. I was just walking, calm, unbothered. But to him, that was enough to be suspicious. Officer Reddick looked at me like I was a threat he'd been warned about, like my skin wrote a story he didn't care to verify. I didn't flinch. I'd been here before, where silence speaks louder than defense, and stillness keeps you alive. So I stood still, steady. He stepped closer, scanning my bag like it was hiding something criminal. And when he asked what was inside, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just opened it, quietly, gently, like it was nothing, like this was routine. He reached in and pulled out a book, looked at it like it didn't belong. Read the title out loud, Leadership Under Pressure. And then came the silence, the kind that makes everyone around stop breathing. I looked him in the eye and said, "I wrote that." He blinked, like the words didn't make sense coming from me. "Didn't expect that, did you?" I didn't have to say anything else. The weight of that moment did it for me. It was a warm evening in downtown Charlotte, and the bustling streets were filled with chatter and life as people darted in and out of cafes and shops. Malik Dawson, a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran on leave, strolled casually down the sidewalk dressed in a simple gray t-shirt, well-fitted jeans, and sneakers. He carried a leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. Malik was heading to a local bookstore to pick up a novel he'd been meaning to read for the first time in months. His mind felt relaxed. Just as Malik crossed an intersection, the unmistakable sound of a police car pulling up interrupted his thoughts. Tires screeched faintly as the car came to a halt. A white police officer, Officer Reddick, stepped out with deliberate slowness, his sharp blue eyes scanning Malik like a hawk sizing up its prey. "Hey you," Reddick barked, his voice cutting through the street noise. Malik paused mid-step, turning his head to meet the officer's gaze. "You're in a bit of a hurry, aren't you?" Reddick continued, his tone dripping with unwarranted suspicion. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" The question didn't land like a casual ask. It landed like a weight, accusatory, loaded, like it had already decided I was lying. I didn't react. No change in breath, no tension in my jaw, just turned slightly enough to meet his eyes. "Just heading to the bookstore," I said, flat, even. I'd learned that tone over years of service. Calm disarms faster than anger ever could. He folded his arms, smiling without warmth. "Bookstore, huh? That bag of yours. What's in it? You carrying anything I should know about?" I felt it then, the stares, the little shift in the air when people slow down, not because they care, but because they expect something to happen. I'd seen that look before, the assumption, the framing before the story's even told. But I didn't flinch. Something steadier took hold instead. "You want to check?" I said, not defiant, just sure. That threw him. He pulled his shoulders back. "I'll be the one asking questions," he barked, just a bit louder than before. It wasn't authority, it was control slipping. The pause between us grew. His hand hovered near his belt. And behind him, the street slowed. People started watching. Phones came out, not rushing, just quietly preparing. I shifted my stance. Not aggressive, just steady. And suddenly, he didn't look so certain anymore. "All right, officer," I said again, keeping my voice calm. "Let's do this the right way." That line wasn't for him. It was for the people who were now starting to slow down. I could feel them, shoes scraping pavement, murmurs picking up just under the surface. The tension had shifted. It wasn't just between us anymore. It was in the air, stretching across the sidewalk, settling on every shoulder around us. I didn't move, but I knew what my stillness was doing. His threat wasn't landing. My calm was louder than his voice. He squared his shoulders like a man trying to hold on to a script. His boots clicked forward. "Drop the bag," he snapped, louder this time, harsher, as if raising his voice might make up for how unsure he felt. I didn't flinch. "Sure," I said after a beat, slow and even. I slid the strap from my shoulder and held it out, carefully, deliberately. It wasn't compliance. It was control. He yanked it from me fast, too fast, like the bag itself might bite him. But I didn't break eye contact. There was no fear in my look, just something steady, something that made his grip falter for half a second. Then came the line. Hands behind your back. He reached for his cuffs like the decision had already been made. I lifted an eyebrow. Am I under arrest? My voice didn't waver. Neither did I. You're being detained, he said. Quick, flat, avoiding the answer. You fit the description of someone we're looking for. There it was again, that tired phrase. The same one every black man hears long before they ever ask what he's done. I stopped and raised my hands just slightly. Not high, just enough to show him I wasn't reaching for anything else. My voice stayed level. Relax. I'm just giving you my ID. I moved slow, calculated. Reached into my back pocket like a man trained to never give someone an excuse. Slid out my card holder. Opened it. Pulled out the military ID I never really meant to use that day. He took it, but not with confidence. He hesitated. Glanced down. And for a second, just a flicker, his smirk cracked. I saw it. The moment his eyes caught the name, the rank, the words United States Air Force. That crack, it was small. Barely visible. But it was enough to shift the air. You still think I fit the description? I asked. Calm. Almost amused. And the crowd felt it. They leaned in. Phones no longer discreet. They were out. Ready. The air was holding its breath. He didn't answer me. Just clenched his jaw and tossed the ID back like it burned him. This doesn't mean you're above suspicion, he muttered. Stay put while I check your bag. I crossed my arms. Said nothing. But the look on my face said everything. I wasn't just calm anymore. I was done giving him space to feel right. Go ahead. Dig. He unzipped my bag like it might bite him. Quick, clumsy fingers betraying nerves he couldn't hide. I didn't move, just stepped back half a foot. Not in fear, just to give him space to keep digging his own hole. My voice stayed calm. Make sure to show everyone what you find. I didn't raise it. Didn't need to. The crowd had grown thick now, silent and still. Phones held up like lenses waiting for the moment someone goes too far. He crouched slightly, peeling the zipper back the rest of the way. Cameras followed his hands. The messenger bag sat open like a stage, and inside, everything was just as I packed it. Neat, intentional. A folded book. A stainless steel water bottle. My laptop. He paused. His hand hovered for a second too long over the book. Then he pulled it out like he expected it to set off an alarm, holding it up like contraband. On the cover, Leadership Under Pressure. An Airman's Guide to Resilience and Excellence. Big bold letters. His brow creased, confused. That's a book I wrote. I said, even tone, no need to gloat. Just the truth dropped gently into the middle of his assumptions. He blinked. Just stood there, book in hand, like it didn't compute. You wrote this? He asked, like the idea had never crossed his version of possible. That's what I said, I replied, tipping my head slightly, voice steady. You want me to autograph it for you? Or are you just planning to keep rummaging through my things? He ignored the jab, kept digging like if he searched long enough, something would justify all this. He pulled out the laptop, turned it over. Looked like he expected it to unlock a secret. But it was just that, a laptop. Normal. Clean. No threat there. So he moved on to the last thing left in the bag. A small, leather-bound journal. Personal. He opened it without asking. Flipped through the pages like it belonged to him. His eyes narrowing as he scanned neat, structured handwriting. Disciplined lines filled with fragments of my deployments, private thoughts, and the weight of service without recognition. He stopped on one entry. I could see it the moment his eyes landed and froze. He read it silently, but I knew the words. You don't fight for recognition. You fight because it's the right thing to do. Leadership isn't about power. It's about service. The line didn't need explanation. And for just a moment, something in him paused. Not visibly shaken, but interrupted. Behind him, the crowd had started to shift again. Restless. Waiting, watching everything. I tilted my head slightly and asked, anything illegal in there, officer? The words came out polite, steady, but we both knew what lived underneath. He slammed the journal shut, harder than needed, and shoved it back into the bag like he was trying to bury what he'd just read. His voice came sharp, forced, brittle at the edges. "You're free to go." But we both knew I hadn't been, not really. I didn't move, not yet. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching him try to crawl out of a hole he'd dug himself into. My voice stayed low, but it held something sharper now. "Not so fast," I said. "You stopped me, accused me of fitting a description, rifled through my personal belongings in front of all these people. I think we're owed an explanation." The crowd erupted, voices rising, not in chaos but in pressure. Questions came fast, overlapping. "What's the reason? You can't just walk away from this." And now the phones weren't just recording, they were demanding. Reddick shifted, unsteady, eyes darting across the sea of lenses. His badge didn't look so secure anymore. The authority he walked in with, it was cracking piece by piece under the weight of his own silence. And I stood tall, still, not gloating, just present, in a way that made it impossible for him to pretend this never happened. He looked at me. I looked right back, and for a second, that pause between us carried more weight than anything he could say. "You're not going to answer?" I asked, voice calm but echoing through the stillness like a blade. "What's this description I supposedly fit?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth sat between us. Undeniable, sharp, heavy. Everyone watching already knew. There had never been a description, just an excuse. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my voice calm but sharper now, cutting through the weight of the silence. "Black man walking down the street minding his own business. That about sums it up, doesn't it?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a low tide of murmurs. Some in disbelief, others in bitter recognition. The tension didn't break, climbed. Reddick's jaw clenched, but he still had no words. And I wasn't done. "You see, officer," I continued, stepping forward with slow control. "What you just did wasn't about keeping the streets safe. It was about power. You thought you could humiliate me, intimidate me, maybe even escalate this into something worse. But you didn't expect me to stay calm, did you?" His face turned red. Still no response. "You didn't expect me to be a veteran. You didn't expect me to have the discipline to stay level-headed, or the experience to see through your game." The words hung there, sharp and focused, and the crowd felt it. Some nodded quietly. Others let out soft, knowing cheers. Not loud but full of weight. I turned just slightly, enough to face them, the people who'd stopped, who were still watching, recording, holding space. "This isn't just about me," I said, voice low but steady. "It's about every single time this happens to someone without a camera, without a rank, without the platform to push back. This isn't justice. It's harassment, and it needs to stop." Reddick tried to recover, but the words didn't come easy. I was just doing my job," he stammered, the confidence drained from his voice. Whatever power he walked in with had scattered across the pavement. I turned back toward him, and what he saw in my face wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Quiet, heavy. "If this is how you define your job," I said, "maybe you're not cut out for it." The line hit harder than if I'd raised my voice. The crowd felt it, heard it, and answered loud. "Hold him accountable," someone shouted. Another voice, "File a complaint." Reddick looked around, as if searching for backup, but all he saw were phones and faces. People weren't looking away. They weren't backing down. His authority, the badge, the tone, the uniform, it didn't hold the same weight anymore. And I didn't need to say anything else. I let the moment sit. Let him feel what it's like to be outnumbered not by violence, but by truth standing still in front of him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The motion was calm. No threat. No sudden shift. Just a quiet decision placed in plain sight. I held it up, screen glowing steady. "Here's the deal, officer," I said, voice even and unshaken. "You're going to stand here, in front of all these people, and explain why you stopped me." I let the silence hold, the implication breathing in the space between us. Then I tapped the screen. Recording. His eyes widened, and I watched it land, the moment he realized everything had been captured. Every word, every pause, every misstep. He opened his mouth, but whatever he meant to say got lost somewhere between panic and pride. "You don't owe me an apology," I added, letting the words cut clean. "You owe every single person here an explanation for why you thought you could abuse your power." And just like that, the crowd went still, not out of fear but anticipation. They weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing, and the air around us shifted, growing heavier by the second, tense with silence, focused like a lens zeroing in. Reddick's face drained pale. His posture shifted, the authority he wore now slipping from his shoulders. He searched for a way out that didn't exist, and I didn't move. I stood there, calm, centered, phone steady, truth waiting. "You want to talk about suspicion?" I said, my voice rising just enough to carry. "Let me make this clear, officer. Suspicion is not a license to harass. It's not an excuse to stop someone without cause. And it's certainly not justification for targeting someone because of the color of their skin." He opened his mouth like he had something to say, but I raised a hand. Not loud, not aggressive. Just enough to hold the moment still and make him feel it. The crowd responded, not with chaos but with quiet energy, a shift moving through them like current. A swell of support without a single chant, just presence. Still, unshaken. "You didn't ask anyone else on the street where they were going," I continued, eyes locked on his. "You singled me out. You rifled through my belongings. You tried to paint me as a threat, without any evidence." My tone never rose, but every word landed with weight. His face flushed again. His stance began to crack, unraveling inch by inch in front of all of us. And then came the attempt, weak, unsteady. "I wasn't singling you out," he managed, voice thin, words shaking loose without conviction. "But it didn't matter." "Weren't you?" I shot back, steady. "Because I don't see anyone else here being stopped. Or are you going to tell us all they fit the same vague description you mentioned?" The crowd didn't need to shout. Their silence said enough. And together we made it clear we saw through it. All of it. I lowered my voice. Not because I was tired, but because the truth didn't need to be loud to land hard. "Here's the truth, Officer Reddick," I said, my words even and deliberate. "You didn't expect me to push back. You thought you could get away with this. Because you've done it before. Probably more times than you can count." I let that sit, the words anchoring into the moment with a quiet force that didn't need raising. But not today. That's when everything shifted. The weight he carried moments ago, false authority, unchecked power, was now pressing down on him instead. He stood frozen, caught beneath it. The crowd wasn't chanting. The cameras weren't flashing. But the silence was louder than either. And I didn't move. I didn't need to. "You picked the wrong person," I said, not with fire but with finality. It wasn't a threat. It was fact. His mouth didn't open. His eyes didn't meet mine. The badge on his chest still reflected the streetlight. But now it reflected nothing else. No respect. No control. Just the shell of something misused. And the authority he'd leaned on from the start? It had collapsed under the weight of its own abuse. I stayed right where I was, steady as ever, because truth had already done the work. I didn't need applause. I didn't need an apology. I just needed him to stand in that space he created and feel the weight of it without looking away. And in that moment, he did. He stood there, still small, surrounded by people he couldn't command, under lights that no longer made him visible, just exposed. I slipped the ID back into my wallet, slung the bag over my shoulder, and took one last look at him. Not with anger, but with clarity. The kind of look that doesn't ask for permission or forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. And then I walked away, not in triumph, not in haste, just as I was before, calm, certain, grounded. But this time I wasn't the only one walking. I followed. Phones lowered. Heads nodded, not out of pity, but respect. The quiet kind. Behind me, he didn't move. Not because he couldn't, but because he had nothing left to say.